Welcome to Parenthood Bites, the podcast where we explore life as a parent in tech. I'm your host, Chiao, and I have over 15 years of experience in tech, and I'm also currently working as a career coach. I'm the proud mother of 3 incredible boys. In each episode, we have an inspiring guest who will share their remarkable story. You'll find their wisdom and insights both relatable and enriching, because after all, we're all in this parenting journey together. So grab your favorite drink, get cozy, and let's dive into today's episode. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 47 of Parenthood Bites. We're here today with not just one guest, but 2 guests. We have Julie Hollek, who is featured on episode 3, and Max Lee, who is on episode 44. Hi Julie and Max, how are you both today?
Hi, I'm good.
Ciao. Doing well, thanks.
Awesome. So I thought it would be neat to do this little panel because we've had, several interviews with different folks. And I thought it would be neat to get a couple of the guests together to kind of talk through some specific topics. I wanted to talk a little bit about parental leave because I know both of you have fairly young kids and you've gone through it recently, potty training. So just starting off, I was curious, and I know you all talked about it in your episode, but I think just a quick refresher of like, what was your parental leave like?
Yeah, so I have 2 kids, Ramona, who is 12, and Ryle, who is 2. And so I've had 2-ish kind of parental leaves. I had Ramona when I was in grad school. So that parental leave wasn't like a real one. It was one of my committee members, like, remembered having not a real parental leave. And so she actually got research funding for me. And so she basically gave me 6 weeks after the baby was born to like not have to like go into the office or be a TA or like whatever. And so that was like very brief. My husband had a full-time job at the time and he did not have any leave. His boss was like, "Oh yeah, aren't we so generous? We like didn't charge you PTO for being at the hospital when your baby was born." And like he had to go to work while I was still in the hospital with the baby. So it was kind of like a lot. But I was in grad school, so my schedule was like a little bit more flexible and like whatever. My second baby happened much more recently and I had a real adult job and not like I was not a grad student. And so at that company I had 6 months of parental leave. That was kind of like a nice big chunk of time, and you can either take it all at once or you can take it in pieces. I took mine all at once.
I have 2 kids, 6 and 4, and for both, I took 4.5 months parental leave. And what was nice is my wife, she also had like a pretty generous parental leave set up with her job. I think she got close to 5 months total. She delivered by C-section for both, so I think there's like a little bit extra you get for that. And I think it's very well deserved because C-sections are a pretty big deal. I think what was nice is like for her, I think 3 months of it was fully paid, and then a couple months of like they stepped down the amount that was covered for a little bit. Where I was at, it was fully covered, which was really nice for the 4.5 months. We both took it all in one go. We thought it was the right thing to do. So this way, we had a lot of time with the kids, uninterrupted. And then, once we got back to work, we'd send them off to daycare. And they both started around the same time, around like the 4.5, 5 month mark.
So you were both around during that entire time, so kind of just splitting up the responsibilities, right?
Yeah, I tried to make it as easy as possible. So we in the beginning got some help. We had a doula, which was nice, leading up to the childbirth, and then we had a little bit of help afterwards. And then I was kind of like the stand-in like night doula for a little while, as best as I could be. And I think we both tried to do our best. You make it, we figure it out, right? Like you're going to be very tired. You're going to be not sure about what to do, but you kind of just things just fall into place. And our kids are both alive still, and they're pretty healthy, so it
Right.
worked.
Yeah. So Julie, in your first leave, your husband was working. How did you all split the responsibilities that way?
I was definitely the primary parent with that one up until she was 2.5-ish. I was like in my 4th year of grad school when I had her. And so I would like take her with me if I had to go in. And it's like kind of more flexible because like it's grad school and like, everybody thinks grad students don't do anything anyway. My husband like had a kind of job where you had to be there in person. He was like a manufacturing startup. And so we couldn't really like bring the baby like with us if we had to. When I had a TA, sometimes either we would try to like arrange something with someone or like really like I would just bring her to like campus with me. And like, she was like kind of like a chill kid and like I had an office that I could close the door. When she was 2, I like was like really trying to finish up writing my PhD thesis. And so like I needed to concentrate. And so that's when we started her in a Montessori school. And so that was like really good for her because it was the first time that she was around other kids in a structured setting where it wasn't like a play date. And this was like also in like, 2014 too. So like it was, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this too, like with your kids, Chow. Like things are way different now than they were even like 10, 12 years ago. With the second kid, my husband was a stay-at-home dad at that point. And so I wanted to take all my time at once anyway because I breastfeed the baby and, just like spending the time like recovering and like, being with her. And then also transitioning Ramona into like being a big sister. And it was just kind of easier to take it in one go than trying to chunk it up. Although I did return a little bit earlier than I intended because I got kind of bored. I was like ready to talk to grown-ups again, except outside of my husband. But like we didn't really have a ton of help because it was just us. And he's, a stay-at-home dad. And also it was like 2022. And so it's still like people were still getting like pretty bad cases of COVID. Traveling was like kind of dicey. And our parents are both, since the baby came when we were older, our parents are older too. So traveling for them wasn't quite as easy. But at some point, Colby's parents drove from Michigan to Texas to spend time with us. My dad did that too, but it was like after the baby was like a little bit older.
That's awesome that they were able to come out to see the baby and stuff. But you're right, like it is a lot for the older generation as well. Like when I had my youngest, my mom wanted me, actually with all the kids, she wanted me to do the 1 month postpartum thing. You don't carry the baby, you don't really move. You're supposed to just kind of lie there and like
Yeah.
eat certain foods, and so she was taking care of baby, but like you could see between the second one and the third one, we had a nanny help as well, but then you could see how it was just that much more tiring for her, because it's a
Yeah.
lot with the baby, even though you're like, you feed them but like you got to feed them a lot. You got to change them and you got to, and then there were the older kids too, right? That you have to also entertain and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I was talking to somebody the other day and I was like, what was the difference in transition between 1 to 2 and 2 to 3? And he was telling me that going from 2 to 3 was just so much harder than 1 to 2 because he's like, we became outnumbered and that became really hard.
Yeah, you're outnumbered, and unless like there was a time period where I was like one kid in one arm holding the other kid's hand, and then Mike had the other kid, and it was like, what do you do, right? You just kind of
Yeah.
wing it.
Zone defense.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But like you're like, it's just one other kid and I've done it twice. It can't be that much harder. But it is because they're all like going in different directions, doing all the things that they each want to do. And you're just like, oh my God, I can't go after all of them. So in terms of preparing for your leaves, I know both of you, I think your second kid, you were both in like a management role. Right. So I was just wondering kind of what were some things that you did to prepare for your leave? Like if I were to make a checklist and I'm going to go on leave in a few months, what are some things I should add to my checklist?
So I think some of the stuff is like specific to managers, but like some of it, like I think it's like anybody who's like in a role where, you have shared responsibility. It's like, it's applicable, but like I took kind of inventory of everything that I was responsible for. And then also everything that I was kind of tangentially related to and like tried to figure out, okay, like, what are the things that if I am not there to do it, it will fall apart. And then of those things that will fall apart, what are the things that absolutely need to be done regardless if I'm there or not pushing it? And so when I kind of had those sorts of things, I started to identify like new owners, writing out documentation. I started to like pair with people a lot more to like sort of get them up to speed on the projects or the sort of roles and responsibilities, that kind of thing. And then because I was a manager, I had like a lot of people reporting to me at the time. And so I worked with them to try to figure out what could I hand off to my tech lead versus like what needed to be handed to my manager. And then like my manager, who at the time was, I think, a director, managing managers for the most part, I was like, all right, this is the tech lead and like she can be in charge of XYZ things. But when it comes from like staffing and allocation and whatever, it's like, this is how I think about these things. And you can too, or you can not. You can throw it in the trash. I'm not going to be there, but this is how I would do it. And so I spent a lot of time, like, yeah, kind of walking her through my thought process and like writing it down. So she had, like kind of run books and like whatever to play from and pull from. I think the other thing that kind of happened was like there was one person, and obviously like everybody's a manager, won't be in the same position. There was one person on my team who it was very clear that she was ready to become a manager. She was a tech lead. There was like a junior person that we had just hired that I was like kind of intentionally not paying much attention to because I was like, okay, I see who I think is about ready to be a manager. Like, why don't you go mentor this person? And so I guess it was kind of nice. It was all women. So it was like kind of like a fun, happy time at work. And so, it became clear that like the tech lead was like ready to kind of become a manager. And so like I worked with her and like we got her promoted like right before I went out. And then like, it was in some ways like a good timing because that manager that I had at the time was the best manager I've ever had. And so, this person who's a baby manager had this like really experienced director who had built people into managers before. So it was like a lot of like just kind of prep work and like trying to not leave things to the last minute because like I think one of the hardest things about going into new situation is gaining context. So giving people context while it's still there to give it to them directly as opposed to just like be like, here's some documents, good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about like the meetings you needed to attend and things like that? Did you have your manager attend that or the junior manager?
I have a whole list of meetings. Yeah. And like I had this document where it was like, okay, this is this cadence of this meeting and this cadence of that meeting. And here's who attend and the point. There's some things where it's like, you need to be here. And there are other things where I'm like, you don't have to be here. The tech lead can be there. And so I think what was helpful was kind of like understanding different meetings have different audiences and different purposes, kind of making sure like the ones where connecting to like the high level narrative of the company where sometimes I didn't even have it right. My manager did. That was a meeting for my manager versus like this meeting is about like the nittiest, grittiest details of they're going to like look at code. You don't have to bother with that. The tech lead will like handle it really well, right? And then the things that were like kind of tricky were the ones in the middle, the ones that were like more like status update or like context sharing, where it's like it would be great for her to have it, but my manager was like managing like a whole organization, and so maybe she didn't have the time to do that. And then so for those kinds of things where it was kind of fell in between, it's like making sure that one-on-ones that I had, where should other conversations be happening? The ones that like I was like facilitating.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I think Julie covered it pretty well. Like, there's just a lot of planning, I think, that goes ahead of it. Once you know that the baby's happening, the baby's coming, then, then you start kind of coming out with an idea of like, all right, when are you going to tell your manager? When are you going to tell your team? And then you develop for me, I put together like a Google Doc that had all the different things that I've been working on. And then I would try to figure out, I would talk to my manager, what could I do to wrap this up or who could I hand this off to? So I think you already mentioned this, but like for my first kid, as an IC, you still do a lot of the same stuff, but it's a little bit easier to pass off some projects because there's going to be another engineer who had context on some of the stuff you worked on, at least one, because typically we always worked in at least groups of 2 or 3, and the team was a little bit better staffed then, and things were like pretty well off. For my second, when I was a manager, I think because I was still fairly new in the role, it was like maybe a year, a little bit more than a year out into my role as a manager. I definitely had a little bit less comfortable taking off, but I did the planning. I did made sure that everything that I could button up was buttoned up. I tried to give everyone as much notice as possible, and I think the team was very supportive. My manager took over, like looked after the team while I was away, and she did an amazing job. Thank you, Chow. Because she also had a large team of her own she was responsible for. What was great is the team had a great relationship with her already, with you. So that was pretty seamless, but I know it was a lot to take on.
Yeah. And so I think the other thing I would probably add to sort of that list is also like just really understanding the benefits and just, discussing with HR and like just understanding what are all the things you need to do. Because I think in some places, like you got to go fill out all the stuff and got to research and figure all of that out. And there's like FMLA and like how much does work cover and all of that. Right. And like what Max said of like C-section versus not, there's a difference in the time of leave. It would be good to just kind of understand what all of that is beforehand.
Yeah, definitely.
Did either of you do like a tour of the hospital before you went to have the baby or take classes?
Yes.
For the first one. Yeah.
Oh, you guys are so good. Such good planners. I just was like, hospital, here I am.
I think for the second one, I only got to do a virtual tour because of COVID. For the first one, we like did the whole tour or whatever. The second one, we did like some online parenting classes. I think the funny thing about a lot of things about having children with a really large age gap is that people don't know about the first one. Right. And like a lot of it's like when you go to parenting classes, I don't know if like either one of you experience this. It's like, maybe it's for like the baby, but you bring your toddler because it's like, so I don't have to bring my like 10-year-old, like she's fine. Right. And so it's like people would talk to us like we were first time parents or whatever, like, oh, this is your first. It's like, no. And it's like, I've got a 5-year-old and I know all this stuff. It's like, great. It's like, well, talk to me when they're 10. I can tell you some things. And so we had this like kind of like funny experience at this like online parenting class because there's like a lot of first time parents and there were a couple of parents that, had a baby before and they were like really cocky. And I'm like, okay, cool. And you're like telling me all about it and like how it was going to go down. I'm like, yeah, no, I know. Don't worry. Yeah. Talk to me when you have to start introducing deodorant to your children and then
That's funny.
I'll give you some tips.
That's funny. I went to the hospital, get a checkup, and they were like, oh,
Oh.
you gotta go. You gotta go to labor and delivery. So then like we went to the other hospital because they didn't do it at that hospital for my weekly checkup. So we had to like go to my mom's like, why don't you go home and take a shower first? I was like, Mom, no, I'm like dilated like 5 centimeters. I gotta go. So we went in and we were like, where's labor and delivery? And then I went in and they were like, you're not having a baby right now. I was like, yes, I am. I'm dilated. They were like, but you don't look like you're in pain. And I was like, well, I just came from the doctor, so this is happening. And so it was all very interesting, like kind of just winged it. But I think people are pretty nice to just kind of help you out, even if they don't believe you're having a baby.
Was this for your first one?
This was my first and second.
Oh, okay.
They were both right after the checkup. And the doctor's like, you need to go. And so then I went in, but it didn't hurt until I was actually pushing the baby out. And so I missed the time frame where you say yes to epidural. Because I was like, I'm fine. It doesn't hurt. And then I was like, oh my God, this is not like taking a dump. This hurts so much. That's what people tell you, right? Yeah. They're like, oh, it's like taking a serious dump. No, it's not. No. It's like maybe if you're taking a dump with like a big old rock, like.
Yeah, that's like the one that will rip your body in half.
Right?
With Ramona, my older one, for both of them, I had to be induced because I had like gestational diabetes and like other stuff that like happens, which gestational diabetes, one of the risk factors for gestational diabetes is be not white. And then it just like increases your risk factor. Anyway, so.
Because I totally had it too.
Yeah. It's like a whole thing, right? So anyway, so like they're like, oh, and I got like a lot more checkups because of it. And they're like, okay, you need to like be induced. Your body doesn't like being pregnant. I'm like, well, great, because I don't like being pregnant. And so they like induced me, and like what I didn't realize is like I was going through back labor. But for my first one, I was pretty young. I was 26 when I had her, and I was like, I'm gonna do this all natural, and like because like the baby class that we'd taken was like the Bradley method, and just breathe really hard and eat a lot of protein, and like I don't know. So, but that doesn't work when you're in back labor. And so I was just like, it was like not okay. And then at one point, every time I had a contraction, because it was so painful, my blood pressure would be like 200 over 100. And they're like, that's not okay. And so they're like, you need to like do something for the pain or your blood pressure. And so like, they're like, an epidural will do something for your blood pressure and for the pain. And I'm like, yes, let's do that. So we did that. And it was like, whatever, fine. The next time I was like, I want an epidural. Tell me how soon I can get it. I don't want to, I'm not messing around. It was
Don't be stingy about the dose.
Yeah.
Make sure you get it. Also, sorry for the TMI earlier, Max. Julie, audience.
I feel like that's pretty benign for the body horror that is pregnancy and labor and delivery.
For what we had to go through, come on.
Yeah.
So, Max, you also did a tour?
Yes, we did. We did do a tour. It was great. We knew the hospital. We knew where we were going to deliver the baby. It was like the neighborhood hospital. We heard it had a great labor and delivery department, and it worked out well because for our second, they had like a pretty liberal, because our second was a COVID baby. So some hospitals had a little bit stricter policies, but there they were pretty chill. Like I was able to actually stay there at the hospital, just no guests, just partner only and stuff like that. But that worked. The first one was like super chill. I was like there for like 5 days. It was like COVID changed it a little bit, but yeah.
Did you have to wear a mask? Or actually, my real question is, did your wife have to wear a mask during labor?
That's a good question. I think we all were wearing masks. Yeah, during that
Wow.
time.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
That was like my worst nightmare. So like with the second one, I was like, I just don't want to wear a mask while I'm like in labor. That seems so
Right.
uncomfortable. And so they made me do not just like a normal COVID test, but like one of the brain tickling ones. And so I had to like wear a mask until that came back. But that was negative, which was like good. But then I think my husband had to wear a mask when like other people were in the room, but then he could take it off like when whatever. But yeah.
That's so uncomfortable because you're like so sweaty too when you're already going through a lot, and it's like, just let me breathe.
And there's so many like wires and like tubes and straps, and just like one on my face that would have done me in.
I think the one thing that made things easier is with the second, even though it was during the time of COVID, it was a scheduled C-section. It was with my wife's like regular OB who she has a great relationship with. She's like fantastic. Whereas the first, it was a little bit rougher, a little choppier, even though there was no COVID. The doctor didn't have the best bedside manner. It was one of the doctors that was talking to me about like what they were going to do with my wife when my wife was pregnant, one right next to me. And there was also some technical difficulties, which was kind of like, first one is they forgot to bring me into the operating room like they did late. They forgot to cover up my wife with a curtain as they were performing the C-section. So there's like kind of visuals that I still hold on to, which isn't great. And then they had some issues with, I guess, like stopping the bleeding. I heard a doctor like kind of cursing. They're like, use there's like, why is this not stopping? Like, use the other thing. And I'm like, this does not sound like you have things under control, guys.
Oh,
That's so
no.
traumatic.
Yeah, it was a little bit. It's a little bit rough. And then with our first, like, she almost had to go to NICU because like her blood oxygenation levels didn't rise as quickly as they should. But what's interesting and what's kind of magical is they didn't actually bring the baby to the mother, to my wife. At first, they were like doing a whole bunch of stuff, trying to testing the baby, whatever. And what was pretty cool is that she was destined for NICU, but once they just gave the baby to my wife for it was like just a couple of minutes, everything was okay. And then her, blood oxygen levels went up, and she was able to like skip the whole NICU thing. So, and I was reading that that's actually like a thing. Like that's why they encourage like skin to skin, especially like right after birth, because that's the nature in us, I guess. It's like we're kind of set up for that. The second one everything went without a hitch though. It was like she was out screaming, very healthy. Like, ah!
Wow, that first story, that's a roller coaster of emotions there.
Yeah, it was something.
I liked hearing the ending. That was a really nice ending to that story.
Yeah.
It's also impressive that your wife was willing to do that again.
The first one, it was wild because she tried to deliver vaginally at first, but it was like a ridiculous, like I felt like it was almost like 20 hours of labor. And again, she also tried to like skip the epidural.
Oh yeah.
And I was like pleading with her. I was like, you've been at this for a while. Like you've shown that you've got the the resilience. Like just take the dang epidural. She eventually did, but yeah, no, I could see it was painful for me to watch her go through that much pain for that long.
Yeah.
But yeah, she eventually like it turned out she had to get a C-section towards the end because like the baby was just kind of like stuck in place, and I think they noticed a little bit of stress in terms of like the heart rate of the baby. They're like, okay, let's abort and just go for C-section. So
Yeah. Don't they say that like after you go through childbirth, regardless of how painful it is, you kind of forget about that pain and then you're ready to have a second one? Isn't that what they say?
It took me 10 years to have another baby though. So I really don't believe them. That was not true for me. It was like, people are like, oh, like, what are the happiest days of your life? It's like, oh, when I got married, when I had my children. Having the first one, that was like one of the worst days of my life because it was just, I was in so much pain. It was like, so, right, I didn't want the epidural. I tried not to get it, but I was in back labor and I didn't really understand what was going on. I just knew that when I had a contraction, I wanted to die. And in between, it still hurt really bad. And so, like, there was no relief. And then, like, I was in labor for 23 hours. And so it was a really long like labor. And I actually almost had to have a C-section because I was like in labor for so long. I just like wasn't dilating enough.
Oh
And
my
so she just like
gosh.
wasn't turning. Eventually, once they gave me the epidural and, I like calmed down and whatever, and they got my blood pressure under control, it was like kind of okay. But then they gave me Pitocin to like try to induce more contractions. But as a result of having been in labor for so long and my water had been broken for such a long time, I got an infection and then so did she. So she had to go to NICU. But the funny thing is, she was born like 38 weeks. So like as early as like they feel comfortable inducing usually. And so she was 8 pounds, 9 ounces. So if she was like a full term baby, she would have been like, I don't know.
Huge.
Yeah, 9.5 pounds.
That's also because of gestational
Yeah.
diabetes.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have it for my older two, and for my last one, I had it, and he was 3 weeks early, and he was 8
Yeah.
pounds, 6 ounces. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, it was crazy. So it was just like, I'm like, because they always tell you, it's like, don't worry, your body won't grow a baby you can't deliver. It's like, yes, it will. And so, like, but it was so funny watching her NICU, right? Because like a lot of the babies are early and like they're very small. They didn't have clothes for her because she was so fat. She was like the fattest like newborn, and they just like put a blanket over her. And so it's like you have like all these babies wearing like doll clothes because like whatever. And then like, my gigantic baby was just there in a blanket. They're like, oh, sorry, everything was too small for her. It's like they had to get special diapers too because they're like, oh yeah. And it's like I remember my friends made me this diaper cake for my shower, and it was like full of newborn sized diapers or whatever. It's like we didn't get through them. She outgrew them too fast. She was gigantic. But then the second one, she was delivered at like 38 weeks too. And actually maybe like a little bit earlier. She was like just under 7 pounds. And that was so much easier. It's like, oh, it's like when the diabetes is like controlled, the baby doesn't grow into like a giant monster. And it's like, okay. It's like if they had been reversed, like maybe we would have like more seriously tried to like have our second baby.
The age gap would not be as big.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have been like more serious about like, no, like let's really try, as opposed to the way that the second baby happened was we hadn't had luck just kind of not trying. And so we were like, well, let's just be done. And so we agreed to be done. But then literally a month later I got pregnant. So the second one was a surprise, and so whatever. But the first one, it was just like so traumatic, and it was like so painful, and it's like a bunch of the stuff that they handled and how they handled it. Looking back, I was like, oh, I probably do have some like trauma around her birth. She had to go to the NICU, and then they also gave me medicine weird, so like I started to swell up like a balloon. And I remember being super pissed at my husband because I'm like, go follow the baby, and he was sitting there like, and I couldn't tell because I was like out of it, but I was so swollen. I think he thought I was like dying, right? And he's like, what do I do? And so my OB was the natural one where they wanted everything to be like, oh, you can do it without drugs and interventions. It's like, no, I couldn't. And so anyway, I think a lot of that made me not super excited to be pregnant and have a baby again because it was a bad experience. And so if I had it the other way, then I probably would have tried harder to get pregnant earlier. But I don't know. I mean, everything would have been different, obviously. And Ryle is like a little monkey, probably peeing on something upstairs right now.
She's in the middle of potty training right now.
Yes. Yeah. We decided to try to ruin our long weekend by doing the 3-day potty training method, and it is not going well. So I don't know. But I also feel like maybe it just has to happen. But like my older daughter potty trained herself like through sheer FOMO and just saw like other kids, using the potty at her Montessori. But the baby just like stays at home with my husband. And like, so she doesn't see it. And like, I think she knows like there's such a big difference between her and her sister that if her sister's going to the bathroom using a toilet, that's just what big people do, right? And she's a baby. Why would she do that? So anyway, so she hasn't been very motivated, but she doesn't like wearing her diaper when it's wet. She will rip it off and like run around naked like a little animal and whatever. And so it's like, okay, it's time. Like, we need to train her. It's like we have these 3 days. Let's just do it. I think it's going to take longer.
Are you just having her walk around with no diaper, just in underwear?
So apparently there are two schools of thought. One is that like you just have them have nothing on, like or nothing on the bottom, right? But then they don't necessarily feel wet the same way that they would like if they like wet their pants. So the other school of thought is you put them in like either underpants or training pads to help them like really feel the wetness and like make them know that like kind of cause and effect. They go potty in their underpants as opposed to in their diaper. It's different and bad. And so we got her like training pants and like underpants and whatever. Those don't hold a lot of liquid, as it turns out. The thing that somebody was saying is like, why don't you have everything covered in your house? I'm like, I don't know. I just thought it would be easier. And so we have some puppy pads around the house. And so we're starting to lay those down everywhere.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, we tried those training pants for a while, but then they just realized like, oh, this is kind of like a diaper. And then like finally it was just like just go with the underwear and the pants. And like the different kids, I feel like they potty train at different stages. Like one kid just so quickly because he saw his older
Yeah.
brother. And then one kid is just like, I really don't care. I have these training pants. I'll do what I want. And I was like, are we ever going to potty train him? You can guess which one this was. And then I was like, but I've never seen an adult that's not potty trained. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
And eventually, after several accidents, it finally happened.
Oh, that's good. I don't know what we're going to do at night. That's like the thing, right? It's like if you really stick to it, but it's like she still sleeps in our bed and I don't I don't want to deal with it on that level. And so I don't know.
Initially, I feel like you would have like diapers or training pants at night, right?
Yeah.
Something on them. At least that's what we
Yeah,
did
yeah.
because I didn't want to clean it off the
Yeah,
mattress.
exactly.
Because like, even if you put pads on there, they're gonna roll off, and then they're gonna pee, and they're gonna stain on your freaking memory foam mattress,
Yes.
and it's gonna be there for years to come. And then you can show them when they grow up, and they don't care. They just laugh at you and go, "Ah, you sleep on that, sucker." What about you, Max?
Yeah, I think potty training is like I think you mentioned it's very different depending on the kid. So my older daughter, maybe it's because she was the first, but it definitely took a little bit longer. But I also think she didn't care as much to like sit in her own pee or poop as my second one. And my second one, she would get upset. Like she was like, "Oh, change my diaper." Like she was like a much more demanding about it. My older one was a lot more chill about it. She'd be like in her poopy diaper, and she'd be like smiling, be like, "Okay, like oh yeah, you got a lot of poop there. Like you might want to change that." The one thing that we thought is like with potty training, you start around a certain age, and I think that's something that we learned isn't necessarily the best approach because it was like you go through unnecessary stress from it because the kid's not ready. The kid doesn't like care to sit in a potty. And we tried things. I think we bribed her with M&Ms like for like a successful pee or poop. We were telling ourselves we're not going to use any kind of bribing because it's like, we want the motivation to be like intrinsic, but we did it. It kind of worked a little bit. But then we actually decided to take a break, and then we picked it back up maybe like 6 or 8 months later. And then she was like, she just kind of naturally fell into it. I think because like social pressure, right? She was in daycare. You're seeing some of her friends there figuring it out, and then she was like, okay, I'm gonna figure it out too. And then the younger one, I think because of her sister, she was like, okay, I'm gonna figure this out quickly. She also didn't like sitting in her pee or poop. And what was amazing about her is like she like nighttime potty trained herself like that. She was like by 2.5, she was done. Whereas my older one, she's still working on like nighttime dryness, which from what I understand is like it's not something that's like will or anything like that. It's like two factors: how much you consume, how much fluid you consume at night, and a level of hormone that naturally grows over time. Things like vasopressin or whatever. And then some kids develop it earlier than others, some are later. So
That's so interesting. I didn't know that.
I've heard about the M&M trick before when we were potty training the older one. People were like, use M&Ms, they're great. I'm like, okay. And what she would do is we'd be like, okay, you did it. And like we give her an M&M. She's like, okay. And then she'd eat it. And then like 5 minutes later, she'd pee again. And what she would do is she would just like pee a little bit. And she just kept, and she would eat like a handful of M&Ms, but it's like to empty her bladder because it's like she knew every time she went, she would get an M&M, and that ended up being not great. So I'm not sure what we're going to do with this one. Her new pediatrician was like, yeah, M&Ms were great. I'm like, I don't know that that's true all the time.
But I think some form of bribery is always a great parenting tool.
It's like always a good thing to have in your back pocket. Yeah. But it's like you have to use it in the way,
sparingly.
yeah, with your kids' reward system, right? With the older one, one, food as a bribe is great for her, or like treats, because she really likes sweets, but she hates vegetables and like, whatever. She's kind of a picky-ish eater, I would say, for like a 12-year-old. But punishment, taking things away, it doesn't matter to her, actually. Like I'll go entertain myself some other way, or I'll like go stare at a wall and use my imagination. The baby, like, food is like a good motivator-ish to her, because actually, she likes food, but she likes all food. So it's like, oh, okay, I'll just eat this other thing. It's fine. Like, okay, I didn't get the sweet.
Yeah, even if you give her the not as good food, she's like,
Yeah.
whatever, it's
Yeah.
fine. We did like a sticker chart. And so like we would put
Oh.
a star every time they went. But then it was like kind of what y'all are saying, where it's like they'll go a little bit. So it's like, no, you have to sit there for a certain period of time, or you need to go this much. Like if I go and the water doesn't even look like anything changed, like no. Like so we did the star thing, and then like star stickers, and then when they got certain number, then they get like a little prize or
Oh.
whatever. But that worked for a while. Everything I feel like works for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah. And then you have to switch it up because they learn. They're like, oh, I know the system.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do the Cheerio thing because you have boys? Like, I've heard that's like if you put Cheerios in the toilet, you tell them to aim when they learn how to like go from sitting to standing. I don't know. I have girls, but like it's something I've heard.
No. When we were starting to train them, like after they got the hang of like, okay, this is, when I should pee and stuff, it was like, okay, start standing and peeing. And then at first they would stand there and be like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I was like, go pee with daddy or something. I don't know. Cause like I'm just standing here too. I don't know, man. And so, we had to have their dad help them
Oh, okay.
figure out how to do that. One of the things I forgot to ask that I wanted to ask kind of around, when you're getting ready to go on leave and stuff, how early do you feel like is good to tell work? How early or how late? And personally, I always felt like it was different between women and men, because for my husband, he could tell whenever because nobody could tell. And like for me, I started showing at like 3 months, and people were like, I hate to ask, but have you been eating a lot? Or like, and then I just wanted people to know that like, no, this is not from eating. But I guess remote is also easier because they can't see your stomach. But I was just curious, how early do you both feel like is appropriate to let work know?
I don't remember when I told anybody in grad school because it was such a long time ago. But for Ryle, I was due in May, and I told work in March. It gave them enough time to get stuff together. When you think about when people quit, it's like 2 weeks notice, or if you're in an at-will state, it's like, I quit, I'm done today, right? But I wanted to give my management chain like a heads up, and then also get people kind of ready to like whatever. I mean, I think the other thing is just honestly, practically speaking, the company that I was working at then had bonus system and whatever. And obviously, like, they're not supposed to make judgments related to anybody's pregnancy status. But like, how do you know that they are or aren't doing that, right? And so I waited until after the bonuses were locked, actually. And then that's when I was like, okay, feel free to tell them. I, at the time, was like trying to like push it as far out as I could, just in general, to sort of whatever. But I was remote at the time, and it's like the webcam that I used was like really high, and so nobody knew I was pregnant. They just knew that I was really grumpy for a while.
Yeah, everyone thought I was grumpy too when I was I was like morning sickness, but mine was all in person.
Yeah.
And so it just all showed right away.
It's like totally different calculus, right? It's like you can get away with it remote totally, where it's like I was talking to one of my friends, and he works at like a university, and some people just be like, oh, by the way, I had a baby. It's like, what?
Whoa.
It was like nobody knew. Yeah. And this has happened apparently a couple times. And it's the people who are carrying the baby are the ones who be like, by the way, I just had a baby. It's not like they're partners. And so
that's amazing. Yeah. I couldn't. It was like, no. But also, like, I had really bad morning sickness. So I was running to the bathroom, like, between meetings or sometimes halfway through the meetings. And they're just like, what is wrong with you? You've had food poisoning for like 2 weeks. And I'm like, oh, I guess I should start telling them.
I think you brought the point. I think it's true. Like, I think between the mom and dad, things could be a little bit different, right? So I think I let my manager know, like, in both cases, I think like around the 4 month mark, around there, because like I think there's a couple of factors. Like, first, it's like the culture at your workplace. Is it very like family friendly? Are they okay with people doing the thing that brought us all into existence, or are they super weird about it and not very accepting or okay with it? And I think I was lucky enough to be a place that was very family friendly. There were lots of parents there. There was no anxiety about sharing the news. It was a celebratory thing. It was like, yay. So like I gave news at like one of our team demos, like I think in both cases. And I got nothing about like, congratulations, right? But in contrast, I know some friends and some family on the East Coast. And even on like for the moms, like, leave is like a little bit shorter than it is out here. And for the dads, in some cases, it's like almost non-existent. So like someone after his wife's C-section went back to work the next day. Another friend, he took 2 weeks, but I think he had to use his vacation time for that. And then even during vacation, like they're like, oh, we're so happy for you. And they're like, by the way, can you follow up on this little issue here with this project? Like during his technical paternity leave, right? So I think it varies depending on where you are, the environment, and just like people's attitudes about that. But it's just bizarre to me because like literally this is how we've come into being, right? So just it should be a little bit more not a big deal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what about when you're in the interview process and you're talking to a prospective employer? I'm always curious, like if you're pregnant or if you're expecting, do you share that? Or also if you have kids, do you share with them that you have kids? For me, I'm not going to just randomly say that. They're like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I have 3 kids. No, but like, we'll be talking about stuff. And then if it goes there, I will mention it just because I'm like, if I say that and they never contact me again, then I really don't want to work there. But what is your approach?
I go complete opposite. I will, when things were more in person, I would lock down all my social media profiles. I would change my phone background. I took off my wedding ring and talk about anything. I was just like, this is me, this is whatever. And so then when I start working a job, people are like, oh, what? Oh, you have a kid? Oh, you're married? Oh, nobody knew. And I think maybe some of this is like sort of like a product of the time or the era where it's like, it was like a lot more concerned about like how that would be perceived. I think now maybe things are different, especially like with like remote. The last job I had, I was interviewing with the person who would eventually become my manager, but at the time, like she wasn't the hiring manager. And my, gosh, how old was she at the time? 7-year-old walked in and I was like, no, but like it was totally like not a big deal actually. She was like, oh, okay, yeah, I have kids too. And it was like, she was like, in some ways it was actually like kind of like one of the best sort of like signs that this was like going to be like a good place for new work, because of like the person who's interviewing didn't care that we got interrupted and also didn't care that I had a kid.
Oh my God, you should have your kid interrupt for any future interviews just in the middle and then see how they respond. That's a perfect test.
Which one? Yeah. When I think about kind of like upcoming jobs I might like pursue, I might be like a little bit less locked down about it, but I probably wouldn't advertise the fact that I have kids or like whatever. It's just like if it happens to come up, but like it's not supposed to, right? Like from like an HR and like legal perspective, like it shouldn't. And so like I try not to like let it come up because like I think some of it too is like kind of being scarred from being a recovering academic. That stuff is definitely held against you. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm no longer in academia. It's like it was really held against me like by a lot of people that I had a baby in grad school. And so that kind of like stuck with me. And it's like, well, like if I have a way of not letting anybody know, then that can't impact their assessment of me. But I think that like, right, and they've shown this in studies, there's a big difference in perception of like parents if they're moms or dad. And it's not great for moms.
No, it really isn't. I think in the past, I would have been also just very tight-lipped about it. And the reason I feel like I would want to share it now is just that I've dealt with too many places that are not family friendly, that are not parent friendly. And I'm like, I just cannot be in another place in the future that's going to, give me a hard time when I have to go pick up my kids or anything. Like, I want the other person to just be like, oh, okay, that's a thing. Just understanding that people have kids.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like how I approach it. I actually have done a few interviews since kid, and I think it's come out like almost, but in a very like natural way. It's not like something that I readily volunteer. If the conversation takes a turn where it does kind of present itself, I'll maybe share it. And I think for me, it's like it's just a fact, and I feel like if that is known ahead of time, maybe it's a good thing if there is like any kind of hesitation on their end to hire someone who's a parent. But I think again there is like this like gender disparity, unfortunately. I think probably stems from biases, right? People might assume that between moms and dads, if dealing with a mom, like they might just assume that there's more kind of like family obligations there than with the dad, and that's kind of just kind of a thought, an idea that needs to change. I think also it's like kind of testing the waters too, like see what their reaction is. Like they're like, oh yeah, But yeah, I also probably don't have much interest in going to a place that, because I think a lot of places that are going to be less family friendly are going to be places where they essentially just want, workhorses, mercenaries who are going to they can rely to work upon, like work, long hours and call upon them to work whenever they, because I've had jobs like that in the past where come in on the weekend, stay late because for this launch, like you look back, the launch was trivial. I can say that definitively. Some of these launches that people were so stressed out about were trivial, and it's about like perspective, right? So my perspective has changed.
I think that one of the big differences to me, though, is right. So when men say that they have children, they're seen as like, good providers. And like when women reveal that they have children, they're seen as like not serious about work.
Yes, or a burden.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like part of my rationale for like, even I do think that some places are still okay places to be if you have a family, even if in the interview process they hold it against you. It's not like ideal, right? But it's like once I get in, I can prove myself, right? I can show my work ethic, I can whatever. And then it's like I can reveal more pieces of who I am as a
Right.
person versus they don't know me. But if there's me and some other person and I'm a woman and I have a kid, and also I think in technical spaces, right, as a woman of color, I have to fight for people to take me seriously,
Yep.
right? And so this is another dimension in which people will not take me seriously, right? And it might be at the end of the day, it ends up being like a pretty okay workplace to be at. But just in the interview process, it's like they're given like so little information about you that everything is this kind of like snap judgment. And it's just from like kind of like, both studies around like perception and then like also like, implicit bias or whatever. It's just, I just worry a lot that like that piece of information does not help me. Right.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've been in huddles where people are like, oh, this person had to go pick up their kids or whatever. So that's going to be a thing we're going to have to deal with,
Yeah.
But like that shouldn't be something held against them. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But like you said, it ended up being somebody else had to, I had to step in and be like, no, that is not an issue. But what if somebody wasn't in the room to say that?
Yeah, exactly. Like I remember this isn't exactly the same thing, but it's like kind of similar. There's somebody that I interviewed for a data science position, and there were actually like a lot of people that were interviewing for this, and like one of the candidates was a woman. She was more technical than anyone. There was some ridiculous question that we were asking that wasn't relevant to data science, but she did it better than anyone. However, she twirled her hair like a lot. That was kind of like when she thought about something, she would twirl her hair. And God, the number of men on the panel that would talk about that. And they ended up not giving her an offer. And because that piece was like distracting, it's like there are like dudes who have like tics too. Like there's a guy who would like, kind of like play with his beard or whatever, but that somehow is like distinguished or somehow it was like sort of like okay. They ended up hiring a man, kind of knowing who the hiring manager was at the time and like how it all went down. It's like you could have predicted that. But like so again, it's like any of these kind of like hallmarks where it's like being a woman means that you're taken less seriously and like you're not considered as technical, even though that woman was more technical than anybody else like in the entire thing. And like she's able to do like some like hardcore coding things that you wouldn't necessarily expect out of data scientists. But again, it's like, but she twirled her hair, right? And it's like hair twirling is like very, woman coded, right? And so it's like kids and like, having to deal with picking them up and stuff like that's like another like for women it's bad, for men it's like good.
I think that's kind of absurd, honestly. I don't know. That's the like if I ever saw that on like interview feedback, I would definitely call it out. I hope it's like this absurd.
It was I was really displeased. It came up in the huddle too, so it was like verbal and like, harder to like really like go back to it and access it in the same way. I think what ended up happening is like they were inconclusive on a couple different people, and then finally they just like kind of snuck someone in who was like whatever, the hiring manager just made a call.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
But I think you brought up like a really interesting point, Julia. I think there's like definitely like kind of a different perspective just because like we all have our implicit biases, right? People come from different levels of privilege. And I think that also shapes like how other people respond to things. Because the one thing I discovered is that in a kind of messed up way, like having kind of entitlement can be rewarding for the person who is entitled in the sense that like what I've seen on the like as a manager and like seeing candidates come through. And this is anecdotal, right? Because I don't have like a large data set to draw from, but it's like it's so the trends were pretty shocking. I'm sure you have like data to back this up. But just like between like women and men, and I'm sure this is changing now because I think people realize that you have to negotiate, but just the number, like the aggressiveness behind the negotiation, like coming to the negotiation table, like there's definitely a gender disparity there. And I think you could probably also draw like different types of backgrounds, demographics, whatnot. There'll probably be some more disparity there. And what I found out is like I think a lot of these things, I know earlier in my career I didn't negotiate at all. Like I just accepted whatever I got. I didn't like, even for like taking like a sick day, I would feel like guilt, or like I would not feel comfortable doing it, or taking vacation. And then gradually as time goes on, you realize like, okay, this is part of like what you're offered. Like you should feel comfortable doing it. For those who do feel comfortable or even further entitled to it, I think it comes much more naturally. And then you realize there's no consequence, right? Like you ask for more money, you ask for a raise, you ask for more money at the negotiating table. The worst you could do is say no.
I've seen though where it's like the worst that they do is they rescind the offer.
From negotiating?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that's like always in the back of my head whenever I think about negotiations. It's like, how can I negotiate in a way that is like safe? The easiest negotiations I've ever had was like, I'm like, I already make this much money. So like, can you match it or not? Because like otherwise, yeah, it's like negotiating, I think as a woman is really hard because like you have to toe a line between, it's like, I think like you're kind of spot on about like how entitlement breeds rewards, right? But only some people are allowed to be entitled.
That's true.
Right. And I think that that's like kind of like one of the challenges. Like I think there's like a study, one of the studies, and this is like definitely like an older one. So like who knows if they redid it. It's just like if you like look at two resumes with the same everything, but like the names are flipped where one person is like female presenting and the other one has a male presenting name. As a child with an extremely gender neutral name, like it'll be interesting to see how she fares growing up. The man resume like got more bites, more money, more like, yeah, this guy's great, right? Versus, and then they did this like with people that had like racially coded names too, and that one was even worse. And then when you started like when you start thinking about layering on intersections, it's like, wow, it gets pretty dicey. But like I think it's like kind of like back to like the parenting question, right? It's like some people are rewarded for being parents like in the workforce and other people are punished, and kind of like both the experience of it but then also kind of like the studies and just trying to like understand. If you don't understand a culture, I think going into the culture very cautiously is like my usual MO. I don't know if the perception is that I'm allowed to have this level of entitlement, so like I will not to begin with. And then like going in, I mean, some places like are clearly not great culture fits for me. And so it's like, okay, I'll pass on that. But for ones where I'm not sure, it's like I always like kind of end up being more kind of like dipping my toe in the water first, as opposed to just like cannonballing in and being like, I have 2 children.
Right, right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, thinking back to early on in my career, although I didn't have kids, but if I did, I wouldn't have said anything. I wouldn't have shared any information, because I was scared they wouldn't hire me. And I also didn't negotiate. I didn't negotiate start date. I didn't ask who my manager was. I didn't ask anything. I was just like, thank the Lord I got hired. And like, I'm not going to ask anything, and I think for me to even share that now is a certain level of entitlement that I've gathered over the years where I'm like, okay, I'm at this age now. I'm not gonna, but if that lowers my chances, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna deal with that at this point, but early on, I wouldn't have done that because I would have, wanted to take every chance I could get. Any little move we make could be the determining factor. And me having a name like the name I have, some people aren't going to talk to me just because they don't know how to pronounce my name.
Yeah.
Or some people are just
Absolutely.
going to be like, what? There's a dash, or like, maybe she doesn't speak English. And I've had people be surprised when I spoke English, and so I had someone give me a speech like when I was little. They were like, you need to change your name to like Mary or Maria or something that people know how to pronounce, and I thought about it for a long time. I was little. I didn't know any better. He was like, as soon as they see your name on the resume, they're going to just like toss it aside. No one's going to want to talk to you. And I thought about that a lot, but I was just like, as a kid, you don't really understand that. All I could think about was like, my face doesn't match any name I could think of. I was like, this isn't a Mary, this isn't a Maria, this isn't a Kathy. Like, I can't think of a name. And so I just didn't do it, you know? And I just didn't understand. And as I got older, I was like, oh my gosh, like anything could be that determining factor between you and that other person. And with my name, I might not even get in the door with it being the way it is, right? That's just the reality of it.
Yeah, definitely. It's like kind of this weird place that like I feel like I fall in as like somebody who's like been in industry for as long as I've been in, which is not the longest but not the shortest. And is that like how do you navigate like a prejudiced workplace? Do you tell people to kind of just don't take up as much space and you'll be able to sneak in and then like or do you tell people it's like, no, take up space, bring your full self to work? But like I've never seen that actually truly work. And so it's like I get like torn, like when I talk to people about this, they're like what I hope for them, right? It's just like use your real name, like, like make people pronounce it correctly. But like some people just like will never do that, right? And it might actually hurt them if they do try to do those things versus like, oh, well, it's like you could do this or do that. Usually like when I've talked to people about it, it's not like about their name, but it might be like how they write something or how they present something. And because it's like to make them like seem like more presentable in ways. Or another kind of thing that I've talked about a lot with some people is that like, as somebody who's minoritized or marginalized, it's like you can like at work often get your way or get credit, but it is hard to get both. So optimize for one or the other, whichever one doesn't make you insane. But like, that's like a bad feeling to do that repeatedly. And like, doing over optimizing one way or the other, like in the long run, like can like really hurt you, not just like you know your company or whatever, but your like career arc, because like you operate in this like kind of like weird way for such a long time. But it is a path to like some amount of success, right? And so it's like, how do you think about talking to people and giving them like advice and like feedback about kind of what the idealized version of things, every like tech being a meritocracy versus cold reality, right? It's like, I think that that's like a big struggle I have, like when I talk to people about stuff like this, because it's like it's stupid that I feel like I can't mention my kids, but I still feel it, right?
You bring up a lot of good points. I don't know what the right answer is. All I know is that like I've definitely been in jobs and roles where it's like I felt like just being there, it's like kind of swimming upstream, and I feel like for other people it was even worse. Like I worked at one toxic place where there was people who were like straight up bullied and in the workplace, right? So it was like people who were like, I think they were taken advantage of. They were kind of like grossly underpaid and whatnot. And I was kind of like, in a relatively more comfortable place, but I had realized like that whole time I had been swimming upstream, right? I should have looked at it as a way, just like a springboard to my next role that was a lot better, where like swimming upstream can be a good thing, right? If like you're being challenged in terms of the work you're doing and it's like, it's enriching, it's motivating. But if you're just like fighting a toxic workplace, then that is not a good use of your muscle and your energy and whatnot. So this comes from probably a place of some privilege. But if you have the opportunity to like move through those types of roles into something that where the job itself is more meaningful, the culture is a little healthier, then that's kind of where you want to be. But I know that's not an option for everyone, right? But that's the ideal, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's just a balance. And I think everybody, over time will figure out kind of how much to share at what point, how much is comfortable. Like for me, sharing Hello Kitty, I got to be real comfortable with you. And then I share Hello Kitty. Like when I go to a job, I don't just bring my dolls. No, I have to like be there for a while with a boring desk. And then when I feel comfortable, I bring in all my dolls. And then you see me. And then boom, in your face.
I love the Hello Kitty so much.
Thank you. But yeah, I know we've been talking for a while. So thank you both for taking the time we're actually recording this on a Saturday. Thank you for taking the time out of your Saturday afternoon to chat with me. And I feel like we could go on and on. Like we'll probably have to do another panel at some point, because I feel like we were getting really into the meat of the stuff that we could talk about forever. So we'll schedule another one sometime if you're both up for it.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you for having us back.
Yeah. Thanks, Chad.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. And thanks. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Parenthood Bites. We hope you found our episode informative and entertaining. If you're a parent in the tech world or know someone who is, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us at chiao@parenthoodbites.co, and we'll be thrilled to add your experiences to our interviews. That's chiao, CHIAO, at parenthoodbytes.co. And to our potential sponsors out there, if you're a business or know of one that would like to support and partner with our podcast, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can also reach us at chiao@parenthoodbytes.co. Thank you once again for tuning in, and we wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Until next time, take care and stay curious.